I never imagined I would be sitting here holding a hospital letter and wondering whether I should show it to the world. Not because of what it says, not because of who wrote it, but because of what it forced me to understand about love. Before I show you why this letter matters, I want you to listen carefully. Because if you are a woman who believes you love my son, or if you are a man who has ever wondered whether someone truly loves you, then this conversation may matter more than you realize. A few weeks ago, I was sitting alone, reading through old documents. At my age, you spend more time looking backward than forward. You find letters, photographs, notes written decades ago, pieces of a life that no longer exists except in memory. And among those papers was a hospital letter, a simple letter. One page, nothing dramatic at first glance, no headlines, no shocking diagnosis, no secret fortune, just a letter. But when I looked at it, I felt something I had not felt in years: fear. The kind of fear only a father understands. The kind that arrives when you realize that no matter how old your child becomes, a part of you will always worry about who stands beside them when life becomes difficult. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you worried about what would happen to them after you were gone? Have you ever looked at someone you love and wondered whether the people around them would protect them when you no longer could? If you have, then you already understand what I'm about to tell you. And before we go any further, I want to ask something simple. If this story means something to you, please leave a like. Subscribe if these conversations about love and family speak to your heart. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is where you live right now. And if someone you care about needs to hear this message, share it with them. Now let me explain why that letter has been sitting on my desk ever since. People think the hardest thing about raising a successful son is dealing with the success. They are wrong. Success is easy compared to love. Success follows rules. Effort creates results. Failure teaches lessons. Persistence changes outcomes. Love is different. Love can make intelligent people blind. Love can make strong people vulnerable. Love can convince someone to ignore warnings they would never ignore in any other area of life. I have watched my son navigate a world most people cannot imagine. I have watched people admire him, criticize him, celebrate him, attack him, misunderstand him. And through all of it, one question has remained inside my mind. Who loves him when nobody is watching? Not when cameras appear. Not when achievements make headlines. Not when success becomes fashionable. Who loves him when he is exhausted? Who loves him when he is difficult? Who loves him when fear enters the room? Who loves him when there is absolutely nothing to gain? Because that is where real love lives. Real love is not revealed during victory. Real love is revealed during vulnerability. And that is exactly why this hospital letter matters. Years ago, there was a period when my son was carrying more weight than anyone realized. Not physical weight, emotional weight, the burden of responsibility, the burden of expectations, the burden of constantly being needed. People often assume that powerful men feel powerful all the time. What nonsense! Some of the strongest men in the world carry loneliness so heavy that nobody notices it until years later. I remember speaking to him during that period. His voice sounded tired, not weak, not defeated, just tired. There is a difference. A man can survive pressure. A man can survive criticism. A man can survive failure. But exhaustion of the heart is something else entirely. And that was when I started paying closer attention to the people around him. Not because I wanted to control his life. A father cannot do that forever. Eventually your children make their own choices. Eventually they love who they choose to love. Eventually they build lives you cannot fully influence, but you never stop observing. You never stop hoping. You never stop worrying. I remember meeting women who seemed fascinated by his accomplishments. They could talk for hours about what he had built, hours about what he had achieved, hours about where he was going. But something always bothered me. Very few asked about who he was. Do you understand the difference? One question focuses on a person's value. The other focuses on their humanity. And humanity matters far more. A marriage cannot survive admiration alone. Admiration fades. Excitement fades. Attention fades. Beauty changes. Circumstances change. Life changes. What remains is character. What remains is loyalty. What remains is the decision to stay. That decision becomes especially important when hospitals enter the story. Hospitals have a strange way of exposing the truth. When illness appears, pretenses disappear. When uncertainty arrives, masks fall away. When fear enters a room, people reveal themselves. That is something life taught me many years ago, and it is something that hospital letter reminded me of all over again. I looked at that page and remembered a conversation that changed how I think about marriage. A conversation with a man who had spent 42 years with the same woman. 42 years. Think about that. Nearly half a century. I asked him the secret. Do you know what he said? He laughed. Not because the question was silly, because the answer was. He said, "The secret is finding someone who still reaches for your hand when life becomes frightening." Such a simple sentence. Yet most people spend their entire lives searching for exactly that. Someone who stays when things become frightening. Someone who does not calculate advantages. Someone who does not evaluate alternatives. Someone who does not ask what they can gain. Someone who simply stays. And that brings me back to my son. People often ask what kind of woman I would want for him. The answer surprises them. I do not care about status. I do not care about prestige. I do not care about appearance nearly as much as people assume. I care about one thing. Can she protect his heart? Not from failure. Failure is inevitable. Not from criticism. Criticism is inevitable. Can she protect his heart from becoming a place where trust no longer lives? Because once trust dies, something precious dies with it, and trust is becoming rare, painfully rare. Modern relationships often move too quickly. Promises arrive before understanding. Commitments arrive before character is tested. People fall in love with possibilities rather than realities. Then they wake up one day, wondering why everything collapsed. Love is not built on possibility. Love is built on truth. And truth reveals itself slowly, very slowly, which is why I want every woman who imagines a future with my son to understand something. Do not marry him because of what the world sees. Do not marry him because of headlines. Do not marry him because of success. Do not marry him because of influence. Do not marry him because of admiration. Marry him only if you can sit beside a hospital bed and still recognize the man you chose. Because one day every couple faces some version of that moment. One day beauty is not enough. One day excitement is not enough. One day attraction is not enough. One day the only thing left is commitment. And commitment is where the hospital letter enters this story. Because what I discovered written inside that envelope was not what shocked me. What shocked me was whose name was attached to it. A name I had not thought about in years. A name connected to a moment my son never fully spoke about. A moment that revealed exactly how quickly love can transform when fear arrives. And when I saw that name, I finally understood why certain wounds stay hidden for so long. What happened next forced me to ask a question no father ever wants to ask. Did the woman standing beside him truly love him? Or did she love the version of him that existed before the hospital letter arrived? The question stayed with me long after I folded that letter and placed it back on my desk. I wish I could tell you the answer came immediately. It did not. Life rarely gives answers that easily. The older I become, the more I realize that love is not something you understand through grand speeches or dramatic moments. Love reveals itself through patterns, through small decisions repeated over time, through quiet actions that most people never notice. That is why I kept staring at the name on that hospital letter. Not because the person was famous, not because the relationship was extraordinary, but because it reminded me of something I had witnessed years ago and never fully processed. You see, there are moments in a father's life when he sees things his son does not. Not because fathers are smarter, not because fathers are always right, but because fathers are standing a few steps farther away. Distance changes perspective. When you are inside a relationship, emotions can blur your vision. When you stand outside it, certain things become easier to recognize. I remember watching my son during that period. From the outside, everything looked fine. People saw confidence. They saw momentum. They saw achievement. They saw a man moving forward. But there was another version of him that very few people ever saw. A quieter version. A heavier version. A version carrying concerns he rarely shared. Some nights he sounded exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. And if you have ever loved someone deeply, you know exactly what I mean. You can hear it in their voice. You can hear it in the pauses between sentences. You can hear it in the way they stop talking about tomorrow. That kind of exhaustion worries a father, because emotional fatigue creates vulnerability, and vulnerability attracts two very different kinds of people, those who want to help and those who want to benefit. The difference is not always obvious at first. In fact, sometimes the second group becomes extremely convincing. That is one of the hardest truths about relationships. The people who intend to stay forever often arrive quietly. The people who intend to leave sometimes arrive with the loudest promises. Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever trusted someone because their words sounded perfect, only to discover later that their actions told a completely different story? I think many people have. And that is why this story matters, because hospitals expose the difference between words and actions better than anything else. When everything is easy, almost anyone can appear loving. When everything is comfortable, almost anyone can appear loyal. When everything is exciting, almost anyone can appear committed. The real test comes when comfort disappears. The real test comes when fear arrives. I learned that lesson from my own life long before my son ever faced it. There were times when I made mistakes, times when I misunderstood people, times when I believed promises I should have questioned. I am not sitting here pretending to be a perfect man, far from it. I have experienced enough failures to fill several lifetimes, but failure teaches lessons success never can. One lesson stands above all others. Pay attention to who remains when circumstances change, because circumstances always change. Always. The young become older, the healthy become sick, the strong become vulnerable, the admired become forgotten, the celebrated become ordinary. Life strips away every temporary advantage eventually. What remains is character. That is why marriage cannot be built on excitement alone. Excitement is wonderful, but excitement cannot carry 50 years. Excitement cannot sit beside a hospital bed. Excitement cannot survive grief. Excitement cannot raise children through difficult seasons. Only character can do that, and character reveals itself under pressure. The woman connected to that hospital letter taught me that in a way I never expected. At first, everything seemed normal. There were smiles, conversations, plans, dreams. The future appeared bright. Then life introduced uncertainty, not catastrophe, not disaster, just uncertainty. And uncertainty changes people. Some become stronger, some become frightened, some become selfish, some become extraordinary. I watched closely, probably more closely than I admitted. A father notices things. We notice when someone's concern feels genuine. We notice when someone's patience begins to disappear. We notice when support becomes conditional. Most importantly, we notice when love starts becoming transactional. That word bothers me. Transactional. I dislike it. Because love should never feel like a business agreement. Yet many modern relationships operate exactly that way. People negotiate affection. They calculate advantages. They compare opportunities. They measure outcomes, and then they call it love. No, that is not love. That is strategy. Love requires sacrifice. Real sacrifice. The kind nobody applauds. The kind nobody posts about. The kind nobody notices, except the person receiving it. When I was younger, I underestimated how important that truth was. Now I believe it may be the most important relationship lesson of all. Because eventually, every marriage reaches a crossroads. A moment when one person needs more than they can give. A moment when one person becomes vulnerable. A moment when staying becomes difficult. That is where forever begins. Not at the wedding, not during the honeymoon, not during the exciting beginning. Forever begins when leaving becomes easier than staying, and someone stays anyway. That is what I hoped my son would find. Not perfection, not fantasy, not a fairy tale, just someone willing to stay. Do you know how rare that is becoming? Very rare. People speak constantly about finding the right partner. Few people speak about becoming the right partner. That difference matters. Everyone wants loyalty. Few people practice it. Everyone wants honesty. Few people embrace it when it becomes uncomfortable. Everyone wants commitment. Few people understand its cost. Commitment always costs something. Sometimes convenience. Sometimes comfort. Sometimes pride. Sometimes freedom. But without sacrifice, commitment becomes nothing more than a word. As I continued reading the hospital letter, old memories surfaced. Memories of conversations. Conversations my son probably forgot. Conversations I never did. One memory returned with startling clarity. He once said something that stayed with me for years. He said, "Sometimes people fall in love with an idea." At the time, I nodded. But later I realized how profound that statement really was. Many people do not fall in love with a person. They fall in love with an idea. The idea of success, the idea of security, the idea of status, the idea of excitement, the idea of possibility. Then reality arrives. Reality always arrives. And suddenly they are confronted with an actual human being. A human being who gets tired, a human being who struggles, a human being who makes mistakes, a human being who needs support. That is where many relationships begin falling apart, because ideas are easy to love, people are harder, and marriage requires loving the person, not the idea. The letter reminded me of a period when reality arrived unexpectedly, not publicly, privately, quietly. The kind of moment that never appears in headlines, the kind of moment that never becomes a story. Yet those private moments often determine the future more than anything else. I remember hearing about reactions, conversations, decisions, behavior changes, subtle shifts that revealed more than dramatic arguments ever could. That was when my concern began growing. Not because someone made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. What worried me was something deeper. Empathy seemed to disappear, and when empathy disappears, love begins starving. A relationship can survive disagreement, it can survive hardship, it can survive distance, but it cannot survive the absence of empathy. The ability to care about another person's pain may be the most valuable quality a partner can possess. Without it, every challenge becomes a burden. With it, even difficult seasons become manageable. That is why I sometimes become frustrated when I hear people talk about relationships. They focus on attraction, chemistry, excitement, compatibility, all important things, but rarely do they ask the question that matters most. What happens when suffering enters the room? Because it eventually will. Not maybe. Will. Every couple faces it. Every family faces it. Every marriage faces it. The only uncertainty is when. The hospital letter represented one of those moments, a moment when suffering knocked quietly on the door, and the response revealed everything. As I read further, I felt an emotion I had not expected. Anger. Not loud anger, not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind fathers experience when they realize someone they love was hurting more than they admitted. I sat there thinking about all the times my son carried burdens without showing them, all the times he protected others from his own worries, all the times he continued moving forward while privately struggling. Many strong men do that. Too many, perhaps. They become so accustomed to carrying weight that they stop asking for help. And when they finally need support, they discover who is truly beside them. That realization can be painful, sometimes devastating, sometimes liberating. The hospital letter was connected to one of those realizations, a realization about loyalty, a realization about intention, a realization about what kind of love deserves forever. And the final paragraph of that letter contained a detail I had completely forgotten. A detail so small that most people would overlook it, but when I saw it, everything changed, because suddenly the entire situation looked different. Suddenly certain conversations made sense. Suddenly certain decisions became understandable. And suddenly I realized that the woman connected to this story had known something long before everyone else. Something that could have changed everything. Something she never admitted. Something she carried in silence. The question is why? Was she protecting him? Was she protecting herself? Or was there another reason entirely? When I finally discovered the truth behind that decision, I understood why the hospital letter had remained hidden for so many years. And I understood why, before anyone marries my son, there is one final thing they must know. Something far more important than the letter itself. The older I become, the less interested I am in appearances. That may sound strange coming from a man who has spent his life watching the world judge people by appearances, but age has a way of stripping away illusions. Eventually, you stop caring about how things look. You start caring about what they are. And that is exactly where this story ends. Not with a hospital letter, not with a secret, not with a dramatic revelation. It ends with a truth that took me many years to understand. After reading the final page, I sat in silence for a long time. The room felt different, not because I had learned something shocking, because I had learned something painful. Painful truths often arrive quietly. They do not announce themselves, they simply settle into your heart and refuse to leave. The detail hidden inside that letter was remarkably small. A date, a conversation reference, a note attached by someone who never expected another person to examine it years later. Most people would have ignored it. I could not. Because suddenly, I understood that during one of the most uncertain periods of my son's life, someone had been given an opportunity to reveal who they truly were. Life does that. Every relationship receives moments like that. Moments when masks become difficult to maintain, moments when intentions become visible, moments when character steps forward. The woman connected to this story had been standing at one of those crossroads. And she made a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a public choice, a private one. The kind that reveals more than 1,000 speeches ever could. She chose silence. Now, silence itself is not always wrong. Sometimes silence protects. Sometimes silence heals. Sometimes silence is wisdom. But sometimes silence becomes avoidance. And that distinction matters. Very much. Because there are moments in love when honesty is uncomfortable. Moments when truth creates risk. Moments when speaking openly may change everything. Yet those are often the moments that determine whether a relationship is genuine. I spent years thinking the hospital letter was important because of what it contained. I was wrong. The letter mattered because it exposed a larger question. Can someone remain truthful when truth becomes difficult? That question has haunted relationships since the beginning of time. Not just romantic relationships, family relationships, friendships, marriages, all of them. Because trust is not built when honesty is easy. Trust is built when honesty becomes expensive. That realization brought me back to countless memories involving my son. Some happy, some painful, some beautiful, some disappointing. I remembered him as a young boy, curious, focused, determined. The world often sees accomplished people as finished products. Parents know better. Parents remember beginnings. We remember uncertainty. We remember failures. We remember insecurities nobody else witnessed. That is why fathers remain protective long after their children become adults. We remember versions of them the world never met. And because we remember those versions, we worry. Not about their achievements, about their hearts. A broken business can be rebuilt. A failed project can be restarted. Lost money can be earned again. But emotional damage is different. Sometimes emotional wounds remain hidden for years. Sometimes they quietly shape future decisions. Sometimes they make trust more difficult. That is why I have always cared deeply about the people who enter my son's life. Not because I expect perfection. Nobody deserves that burden. Not because I expect constant happiness. Life does not work that way. I care because relationships influence the future more than almost anything else. The right partner can help someone become their best self. The wrong partner can slowly drain joy from their life. The right partner becomes a source of strength. The wrong partner becomes a source of uncertainty. The right partner helps carry burdens. The wrong partner adds to them. And when someone lives under extraordinary pressure, those differences become even more important. Have you ever watched someone you love slowly lose confidence? Have you ever watched someone become emotionally exhausted while pretending everything was fine? Have you ever wished you could protect them from pain but knew you could not? That helpless feeling is difficult to describe. Every parent understands it. There comes a point when your child must make their own decisions. You can offer advice. You can express concern. You can share experience. But ultimately, they must choose. And sometimes they choose lessons instead of warnings. Most of us do. I certainly did. Life has a way of teaching through experience when wisdom alone is not enough. The hospital letter reminded me of that reality, not because it documented suffering, because it documented humanity, fear, uncertainty, hope, love, disappointment, all the emotions that accompany a meaningful life. And when I reflected on everything connected to it, one conclusion became impossible to ignore. The greatest relationship question is not whether someone loves you during good times. The greatest question is whether they can love you accurately. Accurately. Think about that word. Many people feel affection. Many people feel attraction. Many people feel admiration. But accurate love is rare. Accurate love sees strengths without worshipping them. Accurate love sees weaknesses without condemning them. Accurate love understands reality. It does not require fantasy. It does not require performance. It does not require perfection. It simply requires truth. That is the kind of love I want for my son. Not admiration, not obsession, not dependency, not convenience. Truth. A woman who understands exactly who he is. A woman who sees his flaws and stays. A woman who sees his strengths and remains humble. A woman who values character more than status. A woman who protects trust. A woman who understands that marriage is not a reward. Marriage is a responsibility. Perhaps that sounds old-fashioned. I do not mind. Some old ideas survive because they are true. Marriage is not two people standing beside each other when life is easy. Marriage is two people refusing to abandon each other when life becomes difficult. That principle never becomes outdated. The older I become, the more convinced I am of it. And that brings me to the final lesson hidden inside that hospital letter. The lesson has nothing to do with medicine, nothing to do with hospitals, nothing to do with records or documents. The lesson is about presence, being present, remaining present, choosing presence. Because eventually, every relationship reaches a moment when there are no perfect words, no perfect solutions, no easy answers, only presence. A chair beside a bed, a hand reaching for another hand, a voice saying, "I am still here." That is love. Not grand gestures, not dramatic declarations, not promises spoken during ideal circumstances. Presence, steady, reliable, honest, loyal presence. The woman who eventually deserves forever with my son will understand that. She will not need constant attention. She will not need constant validation. She will not measure love through public displays. She will understand something deeper. She will understand that real commitment often happens quietly, behind closed doors, during ordinary days, inside difficult seasons. She will understand that trust must be protected, that honesty must be maintained, that loyalty must be chosen repeatedly. And perhaps most importantly, she will understand that love is not about possessing someone. It is about caring for them. There is a difference. Possession asks, "What can I receive?" Love asks, "What can I protect?" Possession creates pressure. Love creates safety. Possession fears change. Love survives it. That is why I wanted to speak about this letter. Not because I wanted to expose anyone. Not because I wanted to revisit old wounds, but because somewhere out there, someone may be preparing to make a lifelong commitment. Someone may be standing at the beginning of a marriage. Someone may be wondering whether the person beside them is truly the right choice. If that person is you, remember this. Pay attention when life becomes difficult. Pay attention when fear appears. Pay attention when sacrifice becomes necessary. Those moments reveal what ordinary days conceal. They reveal character. They reveal loyalty. They reveal truth. And truth is what carries relationships through decades. As I folded the hospital letter one final time and placed it back inside its envelope, I realized something that surprised me. I was no longer thinking about the woman whose name appeared on the page. I was thinking about the future, about the woman who has not yet arrived, the woman who might one day stand beside my son through all the years still ahead. The woman who will understand that love is not measured by what a person owns, achieves, builds, or becomes. It is measured by what remains when everything else is stripped away. Character, trust, loyalty, presence. Those things matter. They always will. And if she ever hears these words, I hope she understands something. I am not asking her to be perfect. I am asking her to be real. I am asking her to be honest. I am asking her to protect what is fragile. Because even the strongest people carry fragile places inside them. My son is no exception. No human being is. And the person who deserves forever is the person who understands that truth and treats it with care. That is what the hospital letter taught me. That is what years of life taught me. And that is what every father eventually hopes for. Not a perfect future, not a painless future. Simply a future built on love strong enough to remain standing when everything else is tested.